And we are live. Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Recycling in America. This is a 5-part webinar series where we're exploring what's working, what's not, and what do we do about it. I'm Keith Harrison. I'm founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership, and I get to be your host today as we jump in to a good 60 minutes. I see about 500 people signing on right now. We have more than 2,500 registered for this event, so it's fun to see everyone coming in. Today's session is the beginning of 5 deep dives into what we as a collective whole can do to build up the US recycling system. And in each one, we're going to bring in special guests from across the whole spectrum to help us dig in. So what are we going to do with our time? Our plan for today. Today, we want to make sure that we hear from you first of what's on your mind. Why are you here and what are you really looking to learn? Because we want to make sure that as you leave each of these 5 sessions, you have a better understanding of how does the system work? How can it work better? And what's your role and what can we do together? The partnership is known for having a lot of data, and we're going to dig deep into what the data says. So I'll set the stage a little bit with what our team has been working on for the past decade around the topic of fixing recycling. And then we'll hear from guest speakers. Our speakers will dig into the nuance from a public perspective and a private perspective. And then we want to make sure we get to your questions. Today we have a chat feature that you should be able to see on the side of your screen. That chat is your ability to ask any question that's on your mind or weigh in on the discussion. So when our speakers, Mayor Cantrell or Anne or Caroline have something to say that really sparks your interest, or you have an example that you'd like to share, pop that into the chat so that everybody else on the webinar can hear about it too. We have 2 special guests joining us today. Kevin and Charlotte are leaders in the Recycling Partnership team, and they'll be active in that chat to help answer questions or connect to resources. So we really want to have a robust discussion with you through that chat feature. But we also have the Q&A. So you should see a separate button on the bottom that says Q&A. And that's where you can really put in questions for our speakers. And there we'll be able to dig into really what's on your mind today. So as I said, we have 3 wonderful guests. Again, I'm Keith Harrison, founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership. And joining us today will be Mayor Cantrell from the city of New Orleans. She'll be popping in a little bit later and will be able to join us for a quick deep dive of what's happening in the city there. But we also have Anne Cannella. Anne is the head of Niagara Cares, which is the philanthropic arm of Niagara Bottling. And Anne will talk to us more about what fixing recycling means from a corporate perspective and from a philanthropy perspective. Then we also have on-the-ground specialist from Fort Collins, Colorado, Caroline Mitchell. And Caroline will talk about the challenges and opportunities she sees every day leading one of the strongest programs in the country. So as we dig in today, we want to make sure we know what's on your mind. So one other person who doesn't have a photo on the screen, but definitely deserves this, is our very own Lily Schwartz. Lily, you want to wave and say hello today? Lily, hi Lily, how are you doing today?
Good. I'm excited to see so many people showing up and in the chat. So thanks for coming.
Lily is my right-hand partner on some of the hairiest, stickiest things that we work on. And earlier this year, I said, Lily, I think we need to launch a webinar series and see what's happening, what the public in the US is really thinking about. How do we fix this system? And Lily has been our lead coordinator of pulling this all together. So I want to give a huge shout out to Lily. And then Lily said she underscored that it'd be really important to start today, making sure we hear from you, the nearly 1,000 people that are on this webinar right now. So we have a quick poll. So everyone get ready for a poll. We want to know a few things about you. Lily, can we go ahead and launch that one? All right. We have 3 questions for you today. One, how familiar are you with the residential recycling system? We know that we have elected officials and staff from elected officials on the line today. We also have corporate perspectives, industry perspectives, and community perspectives. So rate yourself on 1 to 10. How much do you know about recycling? And then the second one is what topic or questions do you have that you hope we can cover in your series? Just a quick answer there, and the staff will be looking at that to make sure we hone our conversation about what you're going for. And then one more little one there at the bottom. What do you do to celebrate Earth Day? I was actually in Texas, in Dallas, with Anne at EarthX, and I went outside, and there were some big, beautiful trees kind of engulfed in the asphalt in the parking lot, and I couldn't help it. And I had to go out and hug a tree on Earth Day. I felt like it was the day to do it. So we'd love to know how you celebrated your Earth Day. So let's see, we've got another 20 seconds here on the question. Lily, how are the responses coming?
Yeah, we've got about a third of participants responded, so we'll give it another few seconds, like you said.
Okay, while we're waiting, Anne, how did you do anything special? Well, you were hosting a number of events for Earth Day, but any tree hugging in your day?
I didn't do tree hugging, but as I came home, I actually got to admire wildflowers I had planted before I left for Texas. They're just peeking their heads up with a little beautiful bright green. So I guess I'll be celebrating Earth Week.
There you go. I love it. Caroline, any tree hugging in your week this week?
I tug trees all the time.
All right.
I got to go on a lovely hike up at Laurie State Park that has ponderosa pines that smell fantastic. So you get to get a little scent of vanilla or butterscotch, depending on your perspective, along with your hike. Really nice.
Oh, I love that. Well, good. Well, Lily, why don't you brief us on what everyone else did?
All right, so y'all should see some results popping in. Thanks for answering the poll. So it looks like we've got a spread of familiarity with the US recycling system, but more so on the, I think most people are here because they recycle like it's their job and are pretty familiar. So good to know that we can get into the weeds with some of y'all. Lots of topics and questions, so we're going to look at those moving forward for the next 4 webinars, really making sure that those are incorporated. And it's nice to see a lot of tree hugging. Every day is Earth Day for me. And maybe we need to call some more politicians, is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it looks like, the role of policy, we're going to talk about this today and throughout the 5-part series, is really how we get the systematic lift. And I think never before has our voice been so important in talking to local leaders, state and federal, about the role of recycling. So I'll make sure I click that button today too, Lily. So thank you. All right, folks, let's go ahead and start to jump in. So we have a good 52 minutes here, and we're going to look at what must be true. So at the Recycling Partnership, we're always asking ourselves, what must be true and what problem are we trying to solve? And so when we think about the US recycling system, we break down what a good system looks like into 5 distinct parts. And it's helpful to give sections to this whole system because it's so intricate. It's public and private pieces all coming together. So over the next 5 weeks, we'll explore the 5 parts of a healthy recycling system. And one that part one of that is design for recycling. Can it go into the system? Have companies done their part to make sure that they're really designing for recycling and telling the truth to the public over whether something is or isn't designed to be recycled? Number two is the ability to recycle. So this is more about what happens at the local level. We want to make sure that if for a healthy system that all households, everyone can recycle at their home. That's our goal for what good looks like. We want to make sure that everyone can, because then we get to the third part, because you can't ask people to recycle if they can't do it. But once they have access to recycling, then you can start to work on public participation. Do people recycle? From there, we look at the fourth part of the recycling infrastructure. Those are our material recovery facilities, or MRFs, the facilities that separate out all your recyclables. So this week when I was at EarthX in Dallas, I had a number of people ask, what happens when I put all my stuff into the bin? How do I know that it really gets separated out and goes to recycling? We'll dig into that in this fourth category called processing and sortation. And then the final piece is definitely not least. Last is not least. In fact, it's the most critical part, the end markets. Does old stuff turn into new stuff? If we do not have success in ensuring that old stuff turns into new stuff, then none of the rest of it even matters. And so we need to make sure that that plays out in terms of using recycled content and building new pieces and pushing forward from there. So these are the 5 parts of the healthy recycling system, and that's exactly what the Recycling Partnership is all about. We're an 11-year-old nonprofit, started to connect all these pieces, and we work primarily through putting grants on the ground to help communities. So hopefully some of you who are here are grant recipients of the Recycling Partnership, familiar with our work and our resources, and we put them to work. Because at the Recycling Partnership is part of our name for a reason. And we work with every single distinct group. We work with business leaders. We believe that the companies who make the stuff should do more and be responsible for getting it back. We also work with communities and recycling facilities. This is really where most of our grant dollars go. We spend a lot of time with policymakers at the local, state, and federal level, working on things like extended producer responsibility, sometimes nested with deposit legislation. On the federal level, we're working on the US tax code and how do we make sure it's more advantageous for a circular economy. We also work with industry partners like MRFs and mills and converters and NGO partners, other environmental nonprofits who play important roles in making this whole system come together. Today, we're going to dig into the residential community. We're going to focus really on what's happening at the community levels. So the partnership has a ton of data, and we publish it all for free for you. But we thought if you were here interested in this topic, we want to make sure you have the right data for the questions that you might have. Everyone who shows up today or registered for today will get this deck. And so I'm going to go quickly through some stats and facts so that you have them at your fingertips as you continue to work on this in the future. So we know in the US, there's about 9,000 different recycling programs, and those programs are recovering less than a quarter of the available recycling that's out there. So we think that there's a huge room to improve, and in fact, we start putting together report cards of how well are we driving a US recycling system. When you put it against those 5 categories of what makes a healthy recycling system, you can start to measure each and every one of them. How are things designed? Can people recycle? Are households participating? Can MRFs really separate it? And does old stuff turn to new stuff? This is our report card of how well each of those parts of the US system are operating. And I think that these are not grades that would earn gold stars from people's parents on report card day. So that's why we need all of us really working together. At the Recycling Partnership, we like to think about things backwards, meaning we think about what is our goal, and then we work our way backwards to what's preventing that goal's success. So I wanted to give you an example of another way to look at this report card and start to use these categories to as a gap analysis. What's holding back the system? And you can apply this example to a specific material in a specific place. So this slide gives us an example of why isn't recycling working for PET thermoforms? Those are things like your salad containers or takeout sandwich container in California, a state with broad recycling access, a long-term commitment, and policy. We can turn this, by looking at these 5 categories, we can create a gap analysis of, well, if we want to see more thermoform recycling in California, what's going wrong? And we can see that the way we start to measure it of 100% of this packaging can be recycled, that's designed for, if it's designed correctly, could be recycled. But where does it start to go wrong? Step one is access. Only 82% of Californians actually can recycle it in their bin. But beyond that, Californians are confused about, is it recyclable? And so we only see 23% participation of actually getting those containers into the bin. Beyond that, we see further challenge within the MRF of separating this light material that flies around with high speeds. And so we've got another problem of the gap market there. And then the final piece is really on the end market. We still need more information on how that old stuff turns to new stuff. So just giving you an example of when we get serious about problem solving, we can use this data to walk backwards. And so we're not guessing what work needs to be done. We can get really strategic about it. So today, as we have our speakers dig in, why don't we have 100% access? Well, let's look at some pictures of what access to recycling looks like across the United States. On the left-hand side, we see some drop-off from Louisiana. In the center and the top right, we see alleyway collection in Lubbock, Texas. And on the bottom right, we see multifamily recycling from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, I think, Lily, North Carolina. So we see that our infrastructure is not always the most inviting for our participation and needs some improvements. Through the partnerships work, some of the data we'll share today is really what happens on the local level. So I want to introduce you to 3 people who allowed us to spend several days with them, going into their house, talking to them about what they produce in their homes, and really understanding what they do and do not recycle. So we have Manuel on the top left, we have Maddie on the right, and we have Artemis on the bottom. Artemis there is holding her specialty brand of rice pudding that she makes, including all the things that are below her that she has generated in her apartment. And Artemis did not believe that recycling was viable and was a real opportunity for her in New Orleans, and so had been putting all of that stuff away in the trash can. Maddie on the other side there, wanting to recycle, but she doesn't drive, she doesn't have a car, and she doesn't have access in her apartment. So really wrangling with those pieces. Manuel on the top, seeing him as one of our most committed recyclers you can see all that good stuff in his blue bin, but still some opportunity of what's remaining in the trash. So this is the type of work we do, not just on the system, but with the humans that are here, and really appreciating the people who have allowed us to understand why they do and do not engage. Some data for you that you'll want to look at as you carry forward from this conversation. One, we thought you might like to know where your state is compared to everybody else. And we thought you might also want to know what's happening material by material. So the partnership spends a lot of time studying this to make sure that you have access to what you need to be able to make good decisions by material and by location. So today we're going to dig in more, and I promise my monologue here is about done. This is the longest one of the 5-part series because I want to give the grounding of where we're going. But providing access is not enough. It's not just enough to say, can people do it? They really must be engaged to make sure we're getting all of those last tons into the bin. And that's why we're working with communities like yours across the country. So let's start to dig in with our esteemed speakers today. Lily, I know the mayor is going to be able to join us for about 10 minutes. I don't think she's here yet. Is that right, Lily?
No, I'm on the call now. Good afternoon.
You are. That's great. Thank you. Mayor Cantrell, we're so glad to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, let's go ahead and get started with you, Mayor. And I just was showing some pictures from 3 of your residents there in New Orleans who allowed us to do deep dives with them to understand why they do and do not recycle. But Mayor, the first time I got to hear you speak was in Nairobi, and it was part of the UN Global Plastics Treaty. And what stood out for me was how candid and honest and clear you were about the challenges that our communities face and why we really need to look to mayors to lead. So we'd love to hear from you first, Mayor, to understand what's happening in New Orleans and hear a little bit more about how you're telling the world of what the importance of the role of the mayor is.
Well, thank you again for having me. What I will say is that it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge across the country, but absolutely in the city of New Orleans. And it's being made possible really through partnerships. Partnerships with the federal government from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. We were able to get a Swiffer grant for 1.4 million. Well, I'm sorry, for 4 million, but also in partnership with Swiffer for 1.4. So combined, we have been able to make recycling possible. But really, it came at the local level from rebidding our trash contractors. And I had to work pretty hard to get to the point where we could rebid, because when I got in, they were in contracts that were a 7-year period. And I will be mayor for 7 years in May. So not even seven years. So what I'm saying is we had to move quickly and aggressively because the need was there, not only for quality trash collection relative to waste, but we really wanted to bring back recycling to our residents. And so with the partnerships, we were able to do that, of course, through the rebid, build in the recycling component. We restructured it instead of a opt-in way for the public, that opt-in. What we found doing the research, that most folks just wouldn't opt in. It's like it's better if you restructure it into an opt-out. And so that's what we did. And when we restructured it to opt out, we saw increased over 70,000 customers, for example, recycling more. And this also led to recycling bins being adequately available to residents. That was something that we knew, being able to meet them where they are, giving them the tools to do it. And so this has been in play now for almost a year, and we're just seeing it being very well received by our residents. And I use myself even as an example. I have less waste. I can't even fill up a trash bag full of waste in a week. But on the recycling side, I have 4 and sometimes 5 bags of recycling material. So through education, we have been very active in that. But also, I would say bringing in our youth has been something that we have seen grow. So just like yesterday, I gave out over 18 grant awards, and this was through a partnership with Bloomberg for youth climate action. And out of the 18, really 16 were heavily focused on recyclable programs. And it was over $100,000 combined. But we have to get our young people engaged. They want to be engaged. And I believe this is going to be the path for New Orleans to not only adapt to climate change, but also to bring the adults along. And that is with our youth being activated to lead. And so I can go on, and I know that you had other questions for me.
Yes,
but
we do.
I will say, though, it's that on the ground, it's the contract with the community and with the contractor that's providing the services here on the ground. So the power through the mayor is through, again, the request for proposals, that spearheads the procurement process, and getting a contractor that represents the priorities of the community that we're serving.
That's great, Mayor. And Charlotte and Kevin, I know we have some resources of what makes a strong contract. So that might be a good thing to pop into the chat there. Mayor, I do see questions coming in for you. And two I'd like to ask. The first one that I see from folks is, how do you recommend, like from your leadership role, what do you recommend for others for engaging companies and policymakers to help be better partners for you?
You know, that's a real good one, because there's just a misconception, as you know, about the idea that community can turn a switch, just flip the switch and it turns on recycling. But the truth, it takes a lot of time, money, resources, communication. I've talked about partnerships to operate a real meaningful program that works for cities. And so we're still trying to figure it out while we're providing the service. And as you know, recycling, it's not just about collecting the materials, as you all mentioned in your opening. We have to find strong partners to buy it, to sort it, as well as to process the materials, that we collect. And that's why you can't just flip a switch to bring recycling services back on, because it really does take a sustainable partnership and with creative ideas to make it happen. I think working with the recycling community is a priority to help structure even the bidding process to make it a win-win, because it's very expensive, as we've talked about. And so I would say for companies, it really goes back to extending producer responsibility and working out with them. Like with the recycling partnership, this is something that you have been very helpful in working with municipalities. But it's the partnership, and every community is different in terms of how we approach it and what is available in our cities, because again, it's not all created equally.
Well said. Well, Mayor, I'm glad to know that the Swiffer grants are coming your way. I know you guys worked hard for that, and we worked hard to help you. Cheering you on and helping to make that happen. So that's I know the Swiffer grants have been very important to communities all across the country. So hearing how critical they are to you, I think, is an important message back to the federal government of how those dollars are being put to work to help Americans every single day. So thank you so much for being an advocate for that, for championing your city. And as someone who's very active in the Global Plastics Treaty too, I love the way you speak truth to power. You never back down. So Mayor Cantrell, thank you so much. I know your time is limited today, but thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you. No, thank you for what you do.
Great. So as the mayor helps set the stage, I think the big point there is contracts really matter. You can't just flip a switch. This takes a lot of time to build and keep going. Companies have a role in helping to communities. I think something, that's often a misconception is that communities make money off of this recycling. And it's really, I think our speakers will be able to dig into that further today. I think the mayor really driving towards the whole system solution is important. So I've stopped the screen share now so we can see our speakers a little more clearly. Anne and Caroline, Lily, just checking in real quick. Does this all look good now that I've stopped the share?
Looks great.
Okay. All right, then let's start to jump in, Anne and Caroline, and let's go a little bit further. Caroline, why don't we start with you? The mayor just shared her perspective. I'd like to know what's different or what's similar for you in Colorado, a state with coming EPR, versus what the mayor just shared.
Well, Colorado is a state, and I don't know the exact details in Louisiana and New Orleans, but on the whole, while Colorado has a fairly green image nationally, folks may be surprised to learn that recycling is not the norm in Colorado. And so there are a lot of folks that have been working for a long time in various systems to try and help build recycling in Colorado. But the norm for the systems in Colorado is the open market system, where you have an unlimited number of haulers servicing a community and oftentimes no community participation in the recycling system. So the development of recycling systems has really been community by community here in Colorado. And that is going to change here in the near future with the adoption of extended producer responsibility that was adopted back in 2022 and will come into full effect the middle of next year and start the implementation. But yeah, I think, similar in Colorado, there's lots of opportunities for growing recycling programs in lots of different ways.
Well, I think that's the point. I think recycling is both a hyper local issue, but there's no there's no one gets a green pass, right? Like California is full of committed players, but doesn't have 100% participation. Same with Colorado. And as the mayor framed in her city is, the challenges abound. And I think that's what is important to keep in mind, is that there's the uniqueness of the locale, but also similar problems that we can address through system approach. And I wondered, you and I got to speak earlier this week about the importance of recycling, and we dug in a little bit about some of the work you've been doing in Texas. So from a company perspective, what stands out to you from what Caroline and the mayor have shared about engaging communities on recycling?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. First of all, just a tiny bit of background. Niagara Cares, which I lead, is the head of Niagara Bottling. And Niagara Bottling is the leading beverage manufacturer in the United States. And we're really committed to integrating sustainability into every part of our business. So there's some things, Keith, that you talked about, and also the mayor did, that we build right into the beginning of our product. We will be the first to launch a label-free product. In fact, it's already launched and selling in Southern California. And the product has been designed from the beginning when we began to use PET with 100% recyclability in mind. And it does not break down into microplastics. So as we think about even the beginning of the process, we're trying to demonstrate our commitment at every step along the way. And I think the other thing I'd say is, because of our size, we have the responsibility and the accountability to lead the industry in that packaging innovation. And because of that, we are deeply committed to recycling across the U.S., not just in a particular area. In fact, we're going to be looking at Colorado this coming year. So, but I'll talk a little bit about Texas in particular. In Texas, we took the data that the Recycling Partnership put out in 2023. Correct my math, my dates if I'm wrong. And use that heat map that they published as a roadmap to think about where we should be investing dollars in recycling. And Texas became a pretty obvious choice, both because of the tonnage of waste and also the access issues across the state. So we have been working directly with the Recycling Partnership to do a few different things. The first, which I think is actually incredibly important, and also one of the reasons that the Recycling Partnership is best positioned for this type of work, is we invested in behavioral research and science, which we saw some of the slides that Keith showed about the work that they did in New Orleans. But this is, in my mind, feeling a very significant gap in our understanding of why people don't recycle, what education or communication needs to be put out. And so the first thing we did was really invest in them, kind of following people around with clipboards, and invest in Keith and your organization to do that work, because that's such, to me, that is an underfunded and incredible part of the work that you guys do. And without that work, we wouldn't have launched the campaign that we did in Texas. So we launched a campaign in Austin based on the findings of the recycling partnership. And it's kind of a pilot test to see if we can move the needle on community engagement and action. And then we're also funding multiple access points across the state of Texas with the recycling partnership. And the first one, I think that's just getting up and underway, is in McKinney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. And I also see I'm monitoring the chat and question and answer too. So the chat is the place, just as a reminder, folks, that you want to share resources. We've got staff who are monitoring, but you can help communicate. You can just chat with each other there too. So that's the purpose of the chat, and the Q&A are the things that are coming to, hopefully going to come to the speakers. And we're monitoring some of those there as well. So keep using those features. Well, I think that gets the work in McKinney is a great example. I want to flag a few things that you said, Anne. One is around the behavior change work. So I actually see Elizabeth Schuessler, who it was the head of our whole brain trust around behavior change for many years and has moved on to a new adventure. So it's nice to see her in the chat there, weighing in with her expertise. But Kevin Goolsby, who's answering some of the questions from a staff perspective today, as one of our behavior change experts on staff too. So when we think about the whole system, we have to design for it. And I see some questions in there. Does the partnership work with or encourage or insist that companies better design for the recycling system? Yes, that's another one of this 5-part series is really around that corporate accountability of designing for and avoiding greenwashing to really say whether something is or isn't recyclable. But then designing for, then making sure people can do it. And then we get to that critical point of what do people do and why? And if you just measure recycling education on awareness, you can get plenty of reach data. There's lots of ads out there. You can get plenty of data that says people say, yeah, I love recycling. But then when you really measure it of what do they actually put in the bin, it's something very different. So that behavior difference of what people say and people do comes down in some part to trust and sometimes down to their misconceptions. So maybe, Caroline, let's dig into the misconceptions piece a little bit. What's a common misconception people have about community recycling programs, and how do you help address those?
There are many misconceptions out there. I think recycling, it's one of those things that is so universally considered good that I think there are a lot of people who are especially always working to try and find the exposés of like, actually, we've all been misled. And so the variations on the details, there's lots of variety out there, but I think there are some groups that when advocating for change can kind of make some broad statements that have sort of undermined some of the public trust in recycling. And so I think from lots of different interests, there has been more of an erosion of trust and a questioning of the recycling system in the last few years than I think I had seen in the past. I've been able to be doing this work for over 20 years now in various forms in the nonprofit and public sector. And so have been having these conversations for a long time. But I would say there are a number of questions that are material specific, and we can get into lots of different rabbit holes. But I think those big picture questions are, does the recycling actually get recycled? Do the haulers actually just collect it and throw it into the landfill? And the bottom line that I share with folks is that recycling is real, and these are valuable commodities that we need to make new products. The guidelines, they vary from community to community for very good reasons. Our guidelines are based on the markets that are available, the transportation to those markets, the facilities that we have in place to get the recycling to those markets. So it's one of the elements that make folks confused of why can I recycle this one thing here, but not someplace else. They're very good, sometimes very technical reasons of like, maybe they don't have enough space in their building for a bin for that material. But all of this feeds into what's recyclable locally, and it does vary from community to community. But on the whole, if you put the materials that are on your local recycling guidelines in the bin, your community can accept them. They will get made into new products. You know, there are absolutely elements in the system that don't make sense right now and that have room for improvement. But on the big, you know, in the big picture, recycling absolutely is real. And, you know, I think we're taking some of those big picture steps like extended producer responsibility to help us design a recycling system that where we have incentives in place for materials to be designed with recyclability in mind that should help all of our systems work better. But that's what I share with folks in the big picture on some of the
Well, we're gonna
misconceptions.
dig in. We're gonna dig into the EPR piece in just a minute, Caroline. So I'm gonna come back to you to talk about this because I know people have a lot of questions that are coming from the recycling point of, or from EPR. And I want to go back to the behavior piece on Texas. And can you get a little more granular about how you're engaging the public on both trust in the system and then in the behavior of doing the work? So I see a lot of questions who have people who want to know more. Can you take us a click deeper?
Sure. I mean, I think there's one of the big ahas that came out of the research that the Recycling Partnership has done is the first messaging that needs to be put out there in terms of how you begin to support the communication around these efforts is to lead with empathy instead of logic. And so the idea that, you know, like even what just Carolyn just said, and sorry, every time Carolyn speaks, my cat kind of starts, I don't know, cat's in love with you, Carolyn. Every time she starts crawling around in the background. But you know, leading with, I know it's confusing is such an important, you know, or acknowledging that there's confusion or providing very simple messages. There was this, when we were at EarthX this week, there was a phrase that kept going around, which was like, steps too small to fail. You can always take a step that is so small that it's not, you literally cannot fail if you throw this plastic water bottle into recycling. You do not fail. And so finding those are sort of, that was a cornerstone, I would say. Those kind of ideas that came out of behavioral research are some of the things that we did to launch a campaign, a communications campaign, that sort of integrated communications campaign. It's all about loving where you live. So if you love where you live, you'll recycle everything you can. Not everything, you don't have to be a, you know, eco-war, but just recycle, try composting and picking up litter. That campaign is now going national and it's gorgeous. If you're ever in Austin,
That's in Austin in partnership with Keep America Beautiful, Keep Texas Beautiful, and Keep Austin Beautiful. Do I have them all?
Yeah. And also it's embedded on top of the work that the Recycling Partnership did. So the Recycling Partnership actually partnered with Keep America Beautiful to educate them, inform them, to actually launch this campaign. So it's really fascinating to work with both organizations because they're working on completely separate parts of the same spectrum, and coming together is really powerful. And we've also done a number of investments into both integrating AI and other types of technology into education platforms, helping to build out databases. And, you know, there's sort of a bunch of foundational element that we've done with the Recycling Partnership. And then that's been expressed itself in this beautiful, wonderful love campaign, which now Caroline is coming to Colorado this year. And we found that this idea of love where you live is a better way to get at, you know, an action than, I don't know, recycle 1, 2, 3, or 5. You know, it's the logic argument is not making sense for people.
Yeah.
And then that kind of leads to apathy.
Mm. I think I see some chat on the side about wanting to know the love where you live, and that builds the trust and the feelings around recycling, and then you get to click a little bit deeper into the practicalities that Caroline talked about of can I recycle this or not, and that really comes down to the local information. Some questions in here that I see around like the how to recycle label, and is it 100% accurate, or where is it applied? And I think there's a lot of good work going on, but with 9,000 different programs, it's not always, nothing is 100% accurate, right? So there's still work to perfect that. But these layers of trust, then fact, and then getting into the behavior, which gets into normalizing the activity of rolling out your cart, using pledges and kind of competition of, you know, if all your neighbors are doing it, are you too? And understanding that a clean and healthy environment is connected to the behavior. I'd love to go back to Caroline, of what will EPR change about the way that you know, EPR is gaining momentum. Colorado was an early EPR state, and just so everyone knows, EPR is extended producer responsibility, which means if you're a company that wants to sell your product in Colorado, you've got to pay into the system to make sure that the stuff gets properly recycled. Eco-modulation is a mechanism that says if your product is already highly recycled, you pay a lesser fee. If your product has recycling challenges, you're going to pay more because there's more work to do, just to make sure. So Anne, I'm going to come back to you in a minute just to give you a prep on some questions around recycled content in your containers and how you're thinking about that. But Caroline, why don't we dig into EPR a little bit first of what will EPR change for you in Colorado, and what advice do you have for others that are in either an EPR state or hoping to be in an EPR state?
Yes, extended producer responsibility. It's going to be a game changer in Colorado and hopefully many states across the nation. So as you were mentioning, Keith, there are lots of different permutations of extended producer responsibility. I know Colorado's program the best. I've been the vice president on the advisory board for the last couple of years, really digging into all the details of how we implement this important policy. So in Colorado, the producers will be paying Circular Action Alliance, which will then fund the collection, processing, and education for recycling for all single family and multifamily housing across the state, starting likely the middle of next year. So as I mentioned before, Colorado is a state that doesn't have very much recycling. We are very much a sort of each community makes up their own systems, sort of a state. And so what it's going to mean in Colorado will be a huge service expansion. So many communities that haven't had recycling are going to get recycling, and that recycling is provided at no charge. So the producers are funding that recycling collection, again, the collection, processing, and education. So huge service expansion. It's also going to align the recycling guidelines. So there's a requirement for a minimum recyclables list that will apply statewide. So right now, from when I was mentioning before how recycling guidelines are incredibly local and they're dependent on transportation and facilities as well as markets. And there's a requirement that all communities in Colorado will have access to recycle the materials on the minimum recyclables list. So right now, some of the rural communities have a smaller list of materials they can recycle. So for education and clarity and consistency and trust in the system, but also just for basic access, so many people are going to get recycling service and they're going to be able to all recycle the same materials. And then you also had mentioned that eco-modulation, which is a huge factor where we're going to start having a financial incentive for materials to start incentivizing those materials that are already packaged in recyclable packaging and start to incentivize more materials being in that recyclable packaging. For communities like Fort Collins that have robust recycling systems right now, it'll mean a cost reduction for residents. But for communities that don't have recycling yet, it's going to be a huge service expansion. So it'll be a huge impact in Colorado.
Okay, so EPR, and see Colorado, California, Washington, Oregon. I'm trying to name all the states that have passed EPR now, Minnesota, Maine, and I'm missing Maryland, right? Is that the one I'm missing? That's the last one. So that's 7 states that have passed EPR in the past 2 years. The partnership is working very hard to help more states pass EPR. If any of you are wondering, wow, is there a toolkit around how to pass EPR? Yes, on the Recycling Partnership website is a free toolkit of what good EPR looks like and how to do it. And why it matters is it makes sure that everyone can, then better education so that everyone does. And it harmonizes, Caroline, you were saying, the harmonizes what can go into the bin. So instead of everything being different in every town, we're going to get to something closer to a consistent yes list for Colorado. Consistent for the state is really the goal. That means we can put pressure and urgency behind what companies are designing for, saying don't use materials that are not recyclable, only use the recyclable ones. And I'm talking about recycling right now, but of course, the importance is to not make it in the first place, to reuse everything we can, and then recycle the stuff that comes next. So that hierarchy starts to have some momentum. So I think I'll come back to you in a second, Caroline, but Anne, let's talk about the corporate role in that. I see a lot of questions for you about what is the role of a company? Do you have a responsibility to use recycled content? What do you advise other companies about being active in this space? And do your bottles have recycled content in them?
Yeah, so first off, we're one of the proud founding partners of the Circular Action Alliance. So it is one way in which we will be also, along with other brands, contributing to support of EPR.
And just one real quick, so folks know, Circular Action Alliance is the producer responsibility organization. So when EPR passes, the next step is a nonprofit forms where all the companies that sell have to be part of this nonprofit and pay into it. That's how it gets paid into. CAA, Circular Action Alliance, is that nonprofit to wrangle all those sellers in the place. So Anne's group is one of the founders of that group. So I just want to give a little context there. Anne, please,
Yes.
continue.
Thank you. And yes, I do think there's a responsibility. I don't know if it's hard to know, where you put the primary responsibility. We do have recycled content in our bottles. We would like to have more. One of the things that is required to have more is to actually have recycled PET, which means there's also an end product. It's a sort of complicated thing because we need our bottles to be recycled in order to get enough recycled PET to actually convert them back into bottles. And so one bottle, especially these label-free bottles, can now become one additional bottle. So our goal is to work with governments and agencies and others to actually increase the availability of what we call rPET so that we can increase the recycled amount in our bottles. In the meantime, we're the inventors of an EcoAir packaging, which is the lightest lightweight wrap around our bottles, and also an EcoAir bottle, which is one of the lightest bottles on the planet. So we have worked since 2009 to remove 60% of the plastic from our bottles. I always say, it's a Niagara bottle because it crinkles. And so we're 2% packaging, and the rest is actually product. And that's the way that we are able to ensure that we're doing both at the same time. And just to be clear, Niagara bottles do not break down into microplastic. So there's common
I think there's a bunch of questions about that, Anne, and I think folks would love a little bit more of what you mean. And just by gradually, anything that's big through the recycling process gets ground down or breaks down into smaller pieces. So when you just say microplastics, are you talking about the blood-brain barrier, or what do you mean there?
I don't want to speak as a scientist. Everything breaks down, correct? But we hear a lot about the microplastics that people are ingesting just by nature of drinking out of a water bottle. You're ingesting plastic. We have innovation teams, lab engineering teams, lab scientists who all they do is study what is the creation of microplastics and how our bottles relate to it. We have found no evidence that we're, by drinking our water out of our bottles, you're putting microplastic into your body.
Well, I think that
So
might be a really interesting topic. Lily, if we decide to keep going with these
Yeah.
after 5, I think there's a lot to do. Maybe as we get ready for the next INC or the next negotiation of the Global Plastics Treaty. Lily and I were just at a meeting yesterday with scientists around the plastic and body interaction in human health. So I think that would be one for its own. That would be a good.
yeah, it probably needs
Um,
its own. It's not enough to be able to answer in a a sound bite.
Sure. I just wanted to recognize, I'm trying to recognize some of the biggest or the most prominent questions. So I didn't
Yeah.
want to not address that. So let's put that as a deep dive, if what is the science? Because that is, it's important to everyone's, and everyone's health. So moving forward, I think we've got about 5 more minutes. We're going to need to wrap up. I'm going to go through our speakers real quick, and really let's land on, so what do we do about it? I've got some closing thoughts I have on what do we do about the system. Again, our topic today is the recycling system. What works, what doesn't, and what do we do about it? So let's go. Anne first, in 1 minute, what's the biggest thing that you're driving in your company and you want to see other companies drive? What do we do for recycling? What's your punchline here?
So for me, it's about investment. I think that it doesn't take huge amounts, but I think, for companies that are working in and around this area, if we can make catalytic investments that launch other catalytic investments in order to increase access and infrastructure across the United States, that's the takeaway I would have is talk with the recycling partnership.
Thank you. And Caroline, what is your call to action for what do we do to drive a better system?
Well, I think there are a number of really important levers. In the state level, as we've already been talking about, extended producer responsibility is an incredible tool to help increase access to recycling and to help incentivize packaging that's designed with recycling in mind. You'd also mentioned earlier, Keith, deposit return systems. They're really important tools to help us get that material back into the recycling system, help incentivize the actual recycling of the material. Minimum content level policies also really are important tools to help complete that recycling circle. They can be embedded in EPR, they can be on their own, but helping to make sure that recycled content that we're putting into the system is getting made back into new products. And I think if we dive in onto the local level, the next steps really depend on the community. But I think one of the things that I have learned in my 14 years at the City of Fort Collins is that every program is incremental. So as the mayor was mentioning before, there are no light switches for any step along the path. And so identifying where your community is right now and what the next opportunity is, whether that's your next step in policy, if that is updating your contracts and making sure they're solid and that they're taking full advantage of the opportunities in your community and that you're holding your service provider accountable, or if it's even just investing in the staffing that you need to identify the next opportunities in your community. There are so many steps, and Fort Collins started very basic, and over 30 years, we have built a really robust recycling program, but every single step was a small one. And so on the local level, identify what your next step is. And I also just wanted to take one other quick moment. I have, as I mentioned, I've worked at the City of Fort Collins for 14 years. We've loved working with the recycling partnership. And also, I am transitioning roles here, just in case anybody is following up after this and is confused at the auto reply you'll get soon from my City of Fort Collins message. I'm going to be transitioning to working with the consulting company HDR, continuing to work on waste and recycling and EPR. So maybe I'll work with some of the communities that are on this call now, but LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect if you're confused at the email while I'm speaking here, and I'm so grateful to connect with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and congrats on your new role. I want to keep us respectful of time, so we've got about 90 seconds left. I think the biggest chat thread that I see now is people really wanting to make sure that we are aware about the human health implications, the planetary health, health implications of plastics, and the science that's behind that. And so I think we'll add that to our series. So I do want to flag that for folks that that's something that we'll be bringing forward thanks to you. But we're going to end this conversation of what do we do about it. So there's many more topics around reuse, composting, the broader perspective of a circular economy. These 5-part series is about recycling. What works, what doesn't, and what do we do about it? And I want to make sure that everyone on this call has an important role to play. If you're a company, we want to make sure you're designing the right way, that you're pushing for policy that helps build a system for what you're making. And we want you to partner with others. So this QR code up here, it pushes, if you're a company perspective, what we'd like to see more from you. From a communities, all our resources are available for free for you. And we want to make sure you have access to those. And from policy makers, policy is the thing that brings the scale at the fastest rate for how we can make the biggest change in this country. And so we want to make sure that we see more good policy spread across the country. So we have resources for everyone, and because everyone has a critical role to play. So thanks to all of you today for joining us for the first of our 5-part series. We'll be here with you every Thursday for the next over 5 weeks. Next time, digging into MRFs, recycling by design, and we'll get into the plastics issue deeper in that one. End markets, how do we make sure that old stuff turns to new stuff? And the last one, a deep dive into policy. We hope you'll join us for every single one of those, and we want to keep the conversation going, so please stay in touch. A very big thank you to Mayor Cantrell, to Caroline, and to Anne for joining us today. Thank you, everybody.